Nicholas Britell has been nominated twice at the Oscars for his music, but now he's trying to get into the Emmy race with his scoring for the HBO series Succession. I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and I'm with Nicholas to ask him, are there any major differences in how you compose for film as opposed to television?
It's a great question. I think that one of the new experiences for me really was this question of what is the nature of writing music for 10 hours instead of 90 to 120 minutes. And in a lot of ways, I think the nature of all of our experiences as audience members is shifting, where the experience of watching a show in its entirety, maybe in one sitting, is something that's really a modern phenomenon in a lot of ways. This idea of sitting and watching, let's say, 10 hours at once. So I think the idea of how different musical themes are initially seeded in the beginning of a show, where they come back, how they evolve, it is a bit different on television than in film. Within film, for example, I sometimes think of this question of like architecture, how there are certain things that, if you seed an idea in the beginning of the movie, where based on character or storyline, is this going to come back? How is something going to evolve? How is it going to change shape? And I think it's a big open question of what the nature of that is with television. You have to always kind of put yourself in the mindset of the audience. I think that's a lot of this job is, you are following your instincts, and then you're also trying to kind of zoom out and put yourself in the audience's shoes and watch it as if you haven't seen this before. And I think that with a longer stretch of musical real estate, the nature of that experience does change. So I spent a lot of time, thinking about, if this idea is here in episode 1, and I bring it back in episode 5, does it still have the same impact? How do I shift that? How do I shift it based on what's happening in the story? And I think for me, a lot of the way that I ended up working through some of these ideas was by actually focusing on bigger picture ideas within the show, bigger picture character ideas, what's the thrust of a sort of storyline. And I would actually write pieces of music. Instead of thinking of a particular cue, maybe moment to moment, I would actually write a piece of music. Like I would say to myself, okay, I'm writing a minuet in B minor based on this theme that I like. And a lot of, there are many different kinds of tones. We talked a little about that earlier. There's ideas of almost this kind of late 18th century classical music, this sound of almost like a dark kind of courtly musical landscape that I think I imagine to myself. That's almost how, let's say, that's how Logan imagines himself. This, like, what's the music that the characters imagine for themselves. And then there's also, for example, a more modern kind of New York hip hop kind of a sound too. Like, we see right at the beginning of episode 1, we see Kendall listening, to the Beastie Boys, for example. So, there are many different types of sounds that are in the show. But I think for me, the biggest thing was the combinations of these sounds, and also always trying to make things a bit misproportioned on purpose. So, for example, making the drums almost a little too big, making the music, so that there is both a seriousness with let's say, this dark classical universe, but there's also an absurdity with sometimes the ways and the proportions and the tunings and the interactions of these sounds. And I think that was all in the hopes of capturing this very complex set of tones that are in the show, which is the really, really dark absurdity, and also the really, really, serious gravitas of the fact that, in a real sense, there are these ever increasing concentrations of power and money in smaller and smaller groups of people, in particular families, in New York, for example. And so that's a very serious, real issue, and deserves its own serious musical treatment. But the show obviously isn't just about that. The show is about that in juxtaposition with the pettiness and trivialities and absurdities and, moment to moment evils of some of these family members to each other. So So that was, yeah, I think there's really two challenges then, I guess. There's this challenge of how you think about music over a 10-hour span, and then the challenge of thinking through these combinations of tones.
So how did you develop the tone for what the theme for Succession would ultimately end up becoming? Did you do a lot of consulting with the creator, Jesse Armstrong, on that, or was it mainly on your end?
So one of the wonderful things I think about having these sort of longer term creative collaborations is that you're brought onto a project early on, and you get more time to kind of live with things and contemplate. I'd worked with Adam McKay on The Big Short, and Adam told me about Succession, early on in the process of making it, and so I was able, for example, to start thinking about it and even come to the pilot shoot. I was able to be on set, and when they were doing that, I met with Jesse Armstrong in New York and was able to present him and with some of these early ideas I was having and talk about things. So it was really leaning into that kind of a close collaborative experience, and trying out some of these ideas from very early on. And I think those sounds, I had done some brainstorming myself of different directions that we could go. I was, creating some strange bell sounds, and I had this. I had what eventually would become the main title theme. I had a sort of early version that I showed Jesse Armstrong when we first met. Actually, I showed him a very early idea of this, and it was from that I actually was able to take some of the chords with Jesse there. I had kind of extracted some of these chords and started playing them on strings for him. And he immediately felt that direction a lot. So really that first meeting I had with Jesse formed the basis of so much of our eventual musical development.
I'm curious, did you see the scripts for the show before you actually saw the shot material when you were composing?
Yeah, so I'm able to get the scripts, and for Succession, I had the scripts, and I would get I would actually even get dailies of the shoot as they were making it.
And what I'm curious about with that is, did you have sort of like an idea for something based on reading a script, but then once you saw it actually in the actual scene in front of you, say, I should probably take this, or I want to take this in a different direction?
It's kind of both. I think, I love working off scripts because the script gives me a different kind of musical response, actually, where I've found, like, just as an example, on Moonlight, I wrote the Littles theme, which became Littles theme. This idea was initially an idea that I had from the script, where to me that film and the script felt like a piece of poetry. So I spent a lot of time thinking to myself, okay, what might be a musical analog for that feeling, that idea of poetry? And I remember recording this demo of this idea and playing it for Barry. And that demo actually became Little's theme in the movie. So, you do have a different set of ideas when you're thinking of things from a script because you're not confronted with visual information, and in a way you have the potential to really hit something spot on or be completely off base. So it's like, I would say that's the thing, and there's no, if something feels right from those early moments and then it works with the picture, I think it really works. But oftentimes I think it's not the case. I mean, there's so many times I'll write things from the script and you put them in front of the picture and you're like, wow, that is not correct at all. So I think, but again, I think that speaks to these are a process. It's not about right or wrong. It's about finding things and experimenting with things and seeing how things feel. So, I guess that's a long way of answering your question, which is that yes, the scripts were really helpful for certain things and for maybe bigger picture ideas, but on a moment-to-moment basis, ultimately the choices of a piece of music, of do I put this here and how does this work and what goes here, those have to be determined by the picture, because especially on something like Succession, the moment-to-moment rhythmic beat of even the dialogue with the humor, that entirely determines how we're going to be thinking about music in a certain area. So it's very much a combination of those things. And I guess, again, a long way of saying that I feel personally the scripts are always so helpful, but the ultimate arbiter of things is the picture.
Did any of the, and we talking about this before we started the hangout, but what did any of the instruments represent certain tones that you were aiming to convey throughout the series, or sort of, or possibly even like represent certain feels for the characters?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I mean, I think that in thinking, for example, about, like I was saying about how, let's say Logan, if I imagine what's the music that he imagines for himself, this kind of idea of like a courtly late 18th century string ensemble, for example, or does that sound of a hip hop beat, for example, feel like New York and like the way that Kendall wants to feel cool. But at the same time, I think the sounds themselves, looking at it from afar now, and thinking about season 1 as a whole, I think I would say, I think they're more about feelings and bigger picture concepts of the storyline and of the world that these people find themselves in, and the nature of their relationships, than I think that they are about any one character. I think for example, there's no real like Logan theme, for example. There's no real like Kendall theme. I think there are just a lot of different sounds that represent different things about all of these characters kind of put together.
So I'm actually curious, what are some of your favorite television themes from over the years, and what were your favorite things about those themes?
Oh, that's a good question. What are some of my favorite themes from over the years? I think growing up, I was always a huge fan of TV themes. I think there's a real TV theme art form in a way. If I have to think back on some of my favorite themes, growing up, I loved the MacGyver theme. I thought that was just an incredible theme. I was big on things like Knight Rider. But at the same time, honestly, like Golden Girls is an incredible theme of music. Golden Girls is amazing. So there's a huge range of possible themes that can work for a television show. And so much of it is just about, finding the sound or the feeling for that particular project. So, but yeah, I think one of the things that was so fulfilling for me, about getting to work on this series was having grown up and been such a fan of TV music and of TV themes, and to finally be able to actually, write my own TV theme for a show was something that was very, very personally, special.
Do you have a favorite musical moment from the first season of the show?
That's another good question. I think there's a lot of things that jump out at me that were particularly challenging, or things that I remember. I love the music that we put for the post car crash in episode 10. I love the experimenting that I was able to do with the theme ideas and bring them into the West and, score them for guitars and banjos. I really love that. I actually, it's kind of one of the things I was saying before, where I just feel, these sort of ideas of, not knowing what is going to happen when you play something on a certain instrument. I'm newly personally amazed with things like that, with how different, how the same piece of music on different instruments feels like a completely different piece of music. I always love how that happens. So those were some of the things that stood out for me. And I think I just love the opportunity to be encouraged in writing this kind of strange, classical music that the creative team let me write.
Well, thanks, Nicholas. To all of your viewers, go to goldderby.com right now and make your predictions so you can compete against our experts, editors, and other fans and prove if you are the smartest prognosticator in Hollywood. But before you go, click our subscribe button on the video, and so you're alerted to our great chats with top contenders. Thanks again, Nicholas.
Thank you so much. Great talking to you.